What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about Unknown 9 Awakening, an action-adventure set in the Unknown 9 universe. But before we get into all that, I do need to inform you that this video is in fact sponsored by the game's publisher, Bandai Namco. And with that exact thing in mind, if you wind up liking what you see here down in the description below, you should find a link where you can learn more about it. With the game itself launching on PS4, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, and PC. Diving right into it though, as I mentioned, this game is set in the universe of Unknown 9. I myself was unaware of what that was, but having looked into it, it is an established universe that is in other forms of media up to this point, with this being their first foray into video games. But they have previously released a trilogy of novels, as well as a comic book series, and even a podcast, I believe, which has done the legwork of establishing this universe. But I would say some of the most important things to understand about this universe are the cycle as well as the fold. So in this world, the universe is made up of cycles, birth and death, as you might imagine, with each civilization growing great over its period of time, only to eventually fall to destruction and pave the way for the next. An ancient civilization known as the Sihin attempted to break this cycle by establishing the Unknown 9, 9 immortal beings attempting to combat this. But then there is the Fold, a mysterious altered dimension that people can gather power from if they know how, which naturally our protagonist just so happens to number among. Which brings us to the story of this game specifically, or at least a little setup to it. I don't want to spoil too much. Unknown 9 Awakening puts us in the role of protagonist Haruna, a quaestor herself who has established powers over the Fold. Haruna has a mentor named Reika, whose former pupil, Vincent, is causing all sorts of problems out of, let's say, concern over the incoming cycle. And Vincent's followers are going to great lengths and using dubious means to accomplish said goal. And in order to stop them, we just so happen to require some allies and an ability to go globe-trotting around the world, bringing us to the game's varied locations. Now that's about as much as I want to say story setup-wise, so let's talk about a few other things. Now, as this is an action-adventure, progression is pretty straightforward, with it coming down to both story progression as well as unlocking and upgrading more abilities for Haruna. Now, story progression is pretty self-explanatory. As you move to certain points in the story, you'll unlock more powers and the like, but along the way, you'll also acquire Gnosis points at certain nodes you can find scattered throughout the game's various levels. Acquiring these and then spending them in your skills tab allows you to upgrade abilities that you have, and then of course using them to devastating effect. Which brings us to the crux of this game, the gameplay and the combat, which comes down to things like utilizing stealth, melee, as well as the powers available to us in order to affect the battlefield. Now, more often than not, these things will begin in stealth. We have the ability to crouch, of course, and then hide just generally out of sight, but also utilizing our power over the Fold, we can temporarily make ourselves invisible, and when enemies are unaware of us in either fashion, we can perform silent takedowns on most of them. Now, some elite enemies you'll come across, this is not available to you right away, so you'll have to fight them in a more head-on fashion, which is going to require a little bit more work. Now, there is a melee system. You've got your light attacks, your heavy attacks. Heavy attacks are necessary for breaking through blocks, and once you acquire your shield power, you can even use that to naturally block attacks, but once it's upgraded, you can also do things like parry if you want to, on top of just normally dodging out of the way, but a fully upgraded shield can even reflect projectiles back at nearby enemies, so there's even some interplay there. Now, by far though, one of the more noteworthy powers, and fun to mess around with, I might add, is what they call stepping. This allows you to effectively possess an enemy and then use them to attack other enemies. Now, across the story, you'll upgrade this a few times, eventually being able to chain these abilities together. That is to say, possessing multiple enemies in quick succession and setting them up to use their attacks, which can set off a chain reaction and then allow you to, of course, position yourself better off. Now, after this, even if enemies happen to survive, they are rather understandably confused about what just happened and thus open to a few attacks as well. Add in some environmental objects, your standard explosive barrels, of course, but also more interesting things like devices that can actively disrupt Haruna and notify enemies to her presence, and each situation you come across is going to have a bit of a dynamic element to it. Now, despite negate the fact that our powers are, in fact, very overpowered in many cases, enemies are not completely helpless either. They can stun you, and some even have special abilities. For instance, those elite enemies are immune to your stealth takedowns, but can also grab you. Another enemy even has a charge ability, has a few different examples, so that's something to know. Now, before we move to wrap up this particular video, I did want to touch on how this is running over on the Steam Deck for those of you who just simply might have been curious, and I'm happy to report that it is definitely playable over there, though officially the game does not have a Steam Deck rating just yet, so it will show up as unknown. But having messed around with it and tested it for myself, I can tell you for sure that it has controller support naturally, but also cloud saves, which are usually pretty integral to that experience just as a default, but also you can adjust the settings to get the game running pretty well over there, though it is worth a mention that they seem to set to high by default, but after messing with them and turning them down from that initially high preset, and also utilizing the game's in-game frame rate limiter, I was definitely able to get this game looking good and running well on that platform. Add in a healthy dose of platforming, and I think you'll see basically everything Unknown 9 has to offer, which is where we're going to wrap up this particular video. With that exact thing in mind, do remember there's a link down in the description below if you want to learn more about it. But otherwise, let me know what you think about this title down below as well, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.